The night was still, almost too still. The kind of silence that makes you uneasy, like something's about to break it. In the heart of the city, Henry Myers poured himself a glass of scotch, settling into the life he thought he had finally built. A life of peace, of success after years of hardship. But tonight something felt different. The shadows in his lavish apartment seemed to stretch longer, as if they knew something he didn't. It had been 3 years since Sarah, his wife, vanished without a trace. The police had come and gone, their inquiries leading nowhere, her absence a haunting emptiness that never truly left him. He had played the part of the grieving husband, made public appeals, appeared at vigils, but deep down he had moved on. He had to. The life insurance claim had been paid, his business was thriving, and he had remarried. Life was moving forward, he thought, leaving Sarah's memory in the rear view. But then that knock came. Soft at first, almost like a question. Pause. And then another, louder, more insistent. Henry froze, the glass of scotch trembling in his hand. He wasn't expecting anyone. His new wife, Laura, was out for the evening, and the only visitors he ever got were business partners or the occasional neighbor. But this felt different. Uneasy. He slowly approached the door, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. Peering through the peephole, his breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. There, standing in the dim hallway, was Sarah. Alive. Her eyes locked onto his, a faint smile creeping onto her lips. Hi, Henry. Miss me? Henry Myers wasn't the type of man to believe in the supernatural. Practical, focused, and driven by logic, he had always found comfort in the tangible aspects of life. Numbers, success, stability. These things had shaped his world after Sarah's disappearance, and he had clung to them for years. His life, at least on the surface, was perfect. A sprawling penthouse apartment on the top floor of a high-rise in the city's financial district, a successful marketing firm, and a wife who seemed to care more about the latest fashion trends than the troubles of the world. But what Henry hadn't counted on was how deep the silence ran in the years since Sarah's vanishing act. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforted you, like the quiet before a storm. No, this silence gnawed at him from within, leaving an emptiness he could never fill. He had searched for her every way he knew how, hired private detectives, placed ads in newspapers, even gone to mediums in a desperate attempt to reach her. The investigation had stalled, with no trace of her to be found. The police, after months of dead ends, had closed the case, declaring Sarah missing, presumed dead. Henry had filed the life insurance claim, paid off some debts, and thrown himself into work. Over time, the hole Sarah left in his life grew smaller, and the noise of his success drowned out the memories. But tonight was different. As Henry stood there, staring at the door, something in his gut twisted. It wasn't the scotch or the solitude that caused it. No, it was the sense that something he had buried long ago was creeping back into his life. Something he couldn't control. His mind raced back to the night Sarah disappeared, a night that had always been shrouded in mystery. She had come home late from a business trip, looking distracted. They argued briefly before she walked out, and that was the last time he had seen her. That argument, so insignificant at the time, now seemed to be a pivotal moment, one that had set everything into motion. Henry Myers was born into modest circumstances, his family never quite reaching the middle class. His father worked long hours as a mechanic, while his mother, though supportive, struggled to make ends meet. From an early age, Henry learned that if he wanted something, he had to work for it. There was no room for weakness in his world. He quickly learned to excel in school, using his intelligence to rise above the poverty that threatened to swallow his family. It wasn't the easiest life, but it instilled a sense of ambition in him that would never fade. By the time he reached his mid-20s, Henry had already started making a name for himself in the corporate world. He wasn't a socialite. He didn't charm people with his smile or offer hollow compliments. He knew that success wasn't about making friends, it was about making deals. He surrounded himself with people who could help him move up, and he discarded those who became obstacles. Life became a series of strategic moves, and with every calculated decision, Henry's wealth and influence grew. It was in this world that he met Sarah. She was different from the women he had been with before. Smart, independent, and fiercely loyal, Sarah seemed like a breath of fresh air in a world filled with shallow relationships. Henry found her intriguing, someone who could challenge him intellectually while still providing the emotional support he needed. When they first met, she was working as a nurse, a role that grounded her in reality, far removed from Henry's world of business deals and high society. Yet there was a strength in her that captivated him, and soon, they were inseparable. At first, their marriage seemed like the perfect blend of stability and ambition. Sarah was everything Henry needed, calm, composed, and willing to support his drive for success. But as the years went by, cracks began to form. Sarah started noticing things that Henry hadn't intended for her to see. His late nights at the office weren't spent working, and his so-called business trips weren't as innocent as he claimed. Sarah wasn't naive. She began finding receipts from hotels that didn't match their travel plans, strange numbers on Henry's phone, and lipstick stains on his shirts. These small signs didn't add up, but they painted a picture Henry couldn't hide. Denial was Henry's first instinct. He loved Sarah, didn't he? She was everything he wanted in a partner. The thought that he could lose her over a few mistakes felt impossible. So he lied. He denied everything and continued the charade. "It's not what you think, baby," he'd say, always convincing her with his charm, always promising he'd do better. For a while, Sarah believed him, but the cracks grew wider with every lie. She wanted to believe him. She did. But deep down she knew the truth. She had caught him too many times. Her disillusionment didn't just stop with his infidelity. As Henry's business expanded, so did his need for more. More money. More success. More power. Sarah, however, was more grounded. She saw the warning signs. While Henry was spending lavishly, buying expensive cars, designer clothes, and taking exotic vacations, Sarah was starting to notice the financial strain. His spending had surpassed the profits his company was making. Credit cards were maxed out, loans were piling up, and Henry was borrowing from every corner he could. Sarah had always been the practical one. She tried to make him see reason, but every conversation ended in anger. She started locking away their savings, canceling credit cards, and trying to fix the mess he had made. This only made Henry resent her more. For the first time, he wasn't in control and he couldn't stand it. It wasn't long before Sarah confronted him about the second mortgage he had taken out on their home without her knowledge. That was the breaking point. Their marriage, once built on love and mutual respect, was now a ticking time bomb ready to explode. Henry's pride was bruised, and the idea that his wife was taking control of their finances infuriated him. His addiction to power had reached a point where he could no longer tolerate being overshadowed by Sarah's practicality. She wanted to leave. He knew it. She had told him as much. But Henry wasn't about to let her take half of everything he had built. The argument that night was nothing new. The words were familiar. "I'm done, Henry. I can't do this anymore." But this time, Henry's reaction was different. He had a choice. He could either let her walk away and risk losing everything, or he could take matters into his own hands. It was then that the idea began to form. A clean break. No mess. No witnesses. Just a disappearance that would allow him to start fresh, without the burden of Sarah or her claims. Henry had never imagined it would come to this. He had always been a man who calculated his moves, weighing every decision carefully, yet the decision he made that night felt different. It felt inevitable, like a shadow that had been creeping up behind him, finally consuming him. Sarah had pushed him to the edge, and now, standing in the hallway of their home, Henry realized there was no going back. The night had started innocently enough. Sarah had come home late from work, her face tired from the long shift, but there was something else, something different in her eyes. She had already confronted him about the finances, about his lies, and now, it was clear that the end was near. Sarah had found the proof and there would be no escaping it. She had already consulted a lawyer, she told him. Divorce was inevitable. But it wasn't just the money or the betrayal that would ruin him, it was the power she held over him. She was taking control, and Henry could feel it slipping away like sand through his fingers. They sat down in the living room, the tension thick between them. Sarah's voice was steady, but there was a hint of exhaustion, of finality in the way she spoke. "I can't do this anymore, Henry. I'm done. We're done." Her words hit him like a physical blow, but he masked his reaction, keeping his composure. This wasn't the first time she had threatened divorce. It was always an empty threat, right? This time, however, it felt different. Sarah wasn't asking for permission. She was telling him she was leaving. Henry felt the walls closing in. The idea of losing everything, the house, the money, his reputation, was too much. He couldn't let it happen. He wouldn't. The thought of Sarah taking half of what he had worked for, the thought of losing control, drove him into a blind rage. He stood up abruptly, pacing across the room, trying to steady his thoughts. But the anger, the frustration, the fear of losing everything he had built, clouded his judgment. It was then that the idea crystallized in his mind. He could make it all go away. No witnesses. No mess. No trail. Just a disappearance. He had always been good at making problems vanish, hadn't he? This was no different. Sarah would never leave him with anything. He had built his empire, and he wasn't about to let her destroy it. He went to the bar and poured himself another drink, trying to calm his nerves. The glass trembled in his hand as he turned back to Sarah, who was now standing by the door, ready to leave. She didn't see it coming. In that moment, Henry knew that he had to act fast, before she could walk out of that door and shatter his world forever. Sarah turned, her coat in hand, ready to walk away. As she reached for the door handle, Henry's heart began to race. This was it. This was the moment he had been dreading and anticipating all at once. He could hear his own pulse in his ears, the seconds stretching into infinity. He needed her to stay. He couldn't let her go. The words, cold and calculated, left his mouth before he could stop them. "You're not going anywhere." Before she could turn around, Henry reached into the drawer next to the bar and pulled out the gun he had kept hidden for just such an occasion. It was small, easy to conceal, and perfect for what he had planned. He raised it swiftly, pointing it at Sarah. Her eyes widened in shock as she turned to face him, confusion and disbelief filling her expression. "Henry, what?" she began, but the words were cut off by the sharp, deafening sound of the first shot. The bullet ripped through her shoulder, sending her staggering backward. She cried out in pain, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, Henry froze, watching her crumple to the ground. The gun was still in his hand, but his mind was elsewhere, too clouded by panic and adrenaline to process what had just happened. Sarah tried to push herself up, her hand gripping the arm of the sofa for support, blood seeping through her shirt. Henry's breathing grew ragged. The mess, the chaos, it was all happening too fast. He hadn't planned for this. He had planned for everything but this. He could still fix it. He could still cover it up. She wasn't dead yet. He grabbed the blanket from the couch, his hands shaking. He threw it over her, wrapping her body in it like a cocoon, and dragged her out of the house. The night air was cold, and the sound of his boots crunching against the dirt seemed to echo through the empty streets. Henry had already picked the spot. It was a secluded clearing, far from prying eyes. No one would ever find her there. He was sure of it. With every shovelful of dirt he threw over her, he buried his guilt, his fear, and his hope that this would all be over soon. The woman he had once loved, the woman who had trusted him, was now nothing more than a problem to bury. Denise woke to the suffocating weight of earth pressing down on her chest. Her body was heavy, each breath a struggle, each movement a painful reminder of her reality. The pain in her shoulder was the first thing she felt, followed by the searing heat as blood trickled down her body. Her mind was foggy, the world around her distorted, but there was one thing she knew for sure: she wasn't dead. Not yet. Her eyes flickered open to nothing but darkness. Panic surged through her, her chest tightening. She tried to scream, but her mouth was full of dirt. Her arms were pinned, her body crushed by the earth that surrounded her. She was buried alive. The thought was enough to send her heart into overdrive, but she didn't have time to let panic take over. She couldn't afford to stop. Not yet. Instinct kicked in. Every ounce of her will to live surged through her veins as she fought against the weight that held her down. Her fingers moved first, brushing against the cold, gritty earth above her. She clawed, her nails scraping against rocks and roots, her skin torn in the process. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, each one more difficult than the last. But she couldn't stop. Not now. With every pull of dirt, she inched closer to the surface, closer to freedom. Her body screamed in protest, the pain unbearable, but she ignored it. The dirt seemed to press harder against her, as though trying to keep her buried. But Denise was determined. She wasn't going to die here, not in this shallow grave, not like this. Minutes felt like hours as she fought her way up, each movement more exhausting than the last. But finally her fingers broke through the earth. The cool night air hit her face like a shock, and for a moment she could barely process it. Her body trembled, but she kept going. Her arms, her legs, everything ached, but she had one goal: get out. She kicked, pushing her body upward with what little strength she had left, her head finally breaking through the surface. She gasped for air, lungs burning, and tears stung her eyes. The world was still blurry, but she didn't stop. She had to keep moving. Denise stumbled to her feet, her knees buckling beneath her. Her body was heavy, her skin raw, but she couldn't afford to rest. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. The world around her was unfamiliar, the landscape dark and unfamiliar. She had no idea where she was, but it didn't matter. She had to escape. Her legs shook as she took her first steps, each one dragging her forward despite the pain. She was weak, her vision swimming in and out, but she kept moving, driven by the need to survive. Her clothes were torn, her skin covered in dirt and blood, but she couldn't afford to stop. She had to get out, to find someone, to make it out of this nightmare alive. As she stumbled down the dirt path, her mind raced. How had she ended up here? How had Henry done this to her? The memory of that night flooded her thoughts. The argument, the gunshot, the pain. Her mind struggled to piece together the events, but she knew one thing for sure. Henry had tried to kill her. And she was still here, still breathing, still fighting. She didn't know how long she walked or how far she had gone, but eventually, the darkness was interrupted by the headlights of a passing car. The sound of tires on gravel sent a shock of adrenaline through her. She waved her arms frantically, but her body was too weak to keep moving. She collapsed onto the road, her vision fading, the world slipping away as the car screeched to a halt. A man rushed out of the car, his face a blur of concern and confusion. He spoke to her in Spanish, but Denise couldn't understand him. She tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Her body, drained and broken, finally gave in. Her eyes closed, and the world around her slipped into darkness. When Denise woke, it wasn't the cold, suffocating grave that greeted her. It was warmth, bright lights, the sterile smell of a hospital, and the soft beeping of machines. She blinked, disoriented, her mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. A nurse appeared by her side, her eyes wide in shock as she saw Denise stir. "Can you hear me?" the nurse asked, but Denise couldn't answer. Her mouth felt dry and her throat burned, but she couldn't speak. She tried to move, but her body ached from head to toe. The pain was intense, but there was something else, something deeper. A sense of loss, a feeling that she wasn't the person she once was. The nurse seemed to understand, hurrying away to fetch a doctor. Minutes later, a man in a white coat entered, checking her vitals with practiced efficiency. Denise wanted to ask where she was, what had happened, but her mouth wouldn't form the words. She was left alone with her thoughts, her mind clouded by confusion. It wasn't until the next day, when she tried to piece together the fragments of her memory, that she realized the truth. She had been in a coma for over a year, her body broken from the ordeal. The doctors told her she had been a Jane Doe, with no identification, no records. She had been found in a near-death state and had no memory of who she was. The name they had given her was Maria. She accepted it, though the name didn't fit. But she didn't know who she was anymore, not really. Denise's heart pounded in her chest as the rideshare car came to a stop outside what was once her home. The house looked different. New flowers were planted by the front door, the paint was fresher, the lawn neatly trimmed. But it was still her house, or at least it had been. She had poured years of her life into that place, and now it stood as a reminder of what she had lost. For a moment she hesitated. What was she doing here? What was she hoping to find? Her mind was clouded, still fractured from the memories of the past. She had been gone for 8 years, and yet it felt like no time had passed at all. She had been buried, discarded like garbage, and now she was standing in front of the life she had once known, the life Henry had stolen from her. But there was no turning back now. Denise stepped out of the car, her legs weak, her body still aching from the long recovery. Each step felt heavy, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She had waited too long for this moment, had fought too hard for it. She climbed the porch steps and stood in front of the door. Her hand trembled slightly as she raised it to knock, but she steadied herself. This was the moment. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The door creaked open slowly, and there he was, Henry. Older, his hair graying at the temples, but still unmistakably the man who had destroyed her life. He stared at her, his eyes widening in disbelief, his face draining of color. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, frozen, as if he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. Denise stood there, her eyes meeting his. There was no anger in her gaze, no screaming or yelling. She wasn't here to punish him. No, she had come for something much more important than revenge. She had come for closure. She had come for the truth. "Henry," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "You're not going to invite me in?" He blinked, his hands trembling as he gripped the doorframe as if trying to hold on to reality. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked over her shoulder, almost as if searching for a camera crew or a police officer hiding nearby. But there was nothing. It was just her. Standing in front of him, alive, breathing, stronger than ever. He finally found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. This can't be happening. You're supposed to be dead." Denise tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I'm not dead, Henry. I'm very much alive. And I'm here to ask you one question." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Why did you do it? Henry flinched at her question, his face paling further. His eyes darted around as if searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. The truth had come knocking and it wouldn't be ignored. Henry started, his voice breaking. He tried to take a step back, but Denise moved closer, her gaze never leaving his. I don't know what you're talking about. You left me. You ran off. You didn't? Denise's patience wore thin. No, Henry. You tried to kill me. You buried me alive. And I'm still here. Her words were calm, but the weight behind them was undeniable. You don't get to lie your way out of this anymore. Henry's face twisted in confusion, anger, and fear. He shook his head, taking a step back. No, this isn't real. You left me. You just disappeared. I reported you missing. I did everything I could. I even mourned you. I didn't? Denise stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. You mourned me, Henry? You buried me in a shallow grave and went on with your life. You moved on, remarried, and cashed in on my death. All while I was fighting for my life. Do you know what it's like to suffocate in the dark, knowing you're about to die? Do you know what it's like to claw your way out of the grave, knowing that the man you loved was the one who put you there? Henry staggered back, his eyes wide with panic. He could no longer hold up the facade. His fingers twitched as if reaching for something, anything, just to escape this nightmare. But there was no escaping now. You can't do this, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I never meant to hurt you. Denise's eyes narrowed. You didn't mean to? You pulled the trigger, Henry. You planned it all. You thought you could bury me and I'd never come back. You thought I'd just vanish into thin air, but you were wrong. I'm still here. And now you have to face the consequences. With those words, Denise reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She dialed the number, her hand steady despite the storm raging inside her. As the phone rang, Henry's face went ghostly pale, and his legs began to give way beneath him. He collapsed onto the floor, his hands gripping his face in disbelief. Denise calmly spoke into the phone, her voice clear and unwavering. I'd like to report an attempted murder. The sirens in the distance were the only sound that followed her words. They grew louder as they neared, but Henry could barely hear them. His world was crumbling, his carefully constructed life shattering in front of him. By the time the police arrived, there was no denying the truth. The evidence was irrefutable: Denise's testimony, the shallow grave, the gunshot residue on his clothes. There was nowhere left for Henry to hide. He was arrested without resistance, his face hollow, his eyes filled with regret. Denise stood by the doorway, watching as they led him away in handcuffs. The weight of the past 8 years, of the pain, the trauma, seemed to lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. And justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. As the police car drove off into the night, Denise stood on the front porch, staring after it. Henry, the man she had once loved, was gone. The life she had known, the life he had stolen from her, was finally over. There was a bittersweet sense of closure in the air, but it wasn't enough to erase the scars. The memories of the years she had spent buried alive, of the fear and pain she had endured, would never truly fade. But for the first time in a long while, she felt free. Henry had thought he could bury her and move on, that he could erase her existence and live without consequence. But Denise had always known there was more to her than what he could control. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor. And no amount of manipulation, no calculated crime, could ever take that away from her. The house, once a symbol of her lost happiness, now stood as a reminder of the journey she had taken. It was no longer her home, not in the way it had been before. But it was the place where the truth had come to light, where the lies had been exposed. It was the place where she had found the strength to confront her past and demand justice. Denise knew that she would never be the same. The woman who had walked out of that grave was not the same woman who had entered it. She had learned, painfully, that even the people we trust the most can betray us in the most unimaginable ways. But she had also learned that strength comes not from what happens to us, but from how we choose to respond to it. As she turned away from the porch and walked back into the night, the cool air felt different against her skin. It wasn't just the end of Henry's reign of terror, it was the beginning of her new life. She had found her way back, and this time she would never let herself be buried again. The truth always comes out. And Denise had finally made her peace.